Hey, everybody. Welcome to Mavens of Data. We've got an awesome show today. We're going to be talking about the skills every analyst needs. We have an amazing guest here in Matt Mike. Before we let him introduce himself, I would love to hear from you guys in the audience. We want to know who's here. If you could just help us out and answer this quick poll, it's going to really help us understand who's in the room, and that way we can kind of steer the conversation there. So I'm going to submit my vote here, and we'll see some quick results here. So we've got a lot of aspiring analysts. We've got some analysts, senior analysts, some other folks. Yeah, if you guys can holler in the chat, that's awesome too. And with that, let's introduce this guest. So Matt Mike is somebody you guys probably know. He's really active in the online community. You see him all over LinkedIn. That's how I got to know Matt, and he's done a ton to help folks understand like what analysts should be focusing on, whether it's technical skills, career stuff, soft skills. Just amazing guy, really giving back after having made his own transition into data, and we're really lucky to have him here today. So Matt, could you just do a little introduction for us?
Yeah, thanks for the great intro, John. Hey, everyone. My name is Matt Mike. For anyone curious, my last name is Mike, so it's Matthew Mike. I think sometimes people think I just put that as a nickname. That's my real name. But yeah, I'm a data analyst and Power BI developer who transitioned into the data field from a non-technical background. So just super briefly, like I graduated with an English degree from college, was a teacher for a few years, ended up going into like a back office operations type role and like in the corporate world, and then made my transition from there into an actual technical role in data. And so, like you mentioned, I just love giving back to the data community and helping anyone who wants to get a job in data get into it. But I have a special place in my heart for those coming from non-tech backgrounds like myself who are looking to make a change.
Yeah, that's awesome. And again, thank you so much, Matt, for being here. Before we get into the meat of the conversation, I want to do some quick housekeeping. So first and probably foremost, this is going to be recorded. And everybody who is on the call or registered, you're going to get a link to the recorded video after. So look for that. It'll probably come through in a few hours after the video is done processing and everything. Next, I want to direct you guys to the questions tab. You should see it at the bottom right of your screen. So at the end of this session, we're going to reserve about 15 minutes, and we're going to put Matt in the hot seat and have him answer some of your questions. So please use that questions tab, upvote questions that you like. It's a really helpful way for us to organize them. And then finally, we'd love for you to connect with us, Maven Analytics, Matt, myself. We're all really active on LinkedIn. We're all really active on YouTube. We'll have a link to Matt's YouTube at the end. It's an awesome channel. So look for that. And with that, let's get into the meat of the show. These are just some of the topics that we're planning to cover today. We're going to go pretty deep on some of them, and we'll definitely cover some other stuff too. It's meant to be really a free-flowing conversation, so we might get off topic a little bit, but we'll use this as a guide. So with that, Matt, I'd love to understand, we've got a lot of aspiring analysts in the room. You're somebody who more recently than me made this transition, did it successfully, and you've helped a ton of other people kind of through your content, through coaching individuals. Like, let's talk about first the technical skills. Like, if somebody's trying to break in, or even if somebody's early in the career, what are the most important technical skills that you think somebody should be focused on?
Yeah, for me, I would say like the core stack should be Excel, SQL, and like a BI skill, whether that's Tableau, Power BI. There's lots of others. Those two tend to be the most popular, I suppose. And I think where, like for me, for example, anywhere that I've gone, I've only been in the field for a few years, but I've had a few different jobs doing at different data jobs. I've always needed a combination of those three in every role. So I think those three really serve as a great foundation for, especially for people who are brand new, they're trying to get that jump into the field. Maybe they're targeting something a little bit more entry level, or just kind of foundational. I think that's a great tech stack to approach.
Yeah, that's awesome. One of the things we had talked about before was Python specifically. And I think what's interesting is we hear it. I think the whole industry loves to talk about how Python's so important. I think you're a little less bullish on Python. I guess I'd love to hear your take on who it's important for, who it might not be important for.
Yeah, it's such a great question, and it always comes up. And I hear it said often that Python is, the number one skill on data analyst postings, and it should be one of the first skills you take on. It might be true for some, but and I'm just speaking from experience. I have never needed Python in any of the roles I've been in. No one I work with has ever needed Python. Right now, I work for the city. We have a lot of analysts, engineers, all that. There's one guy that uses Python sometimes. It's not required. And I'd say we have a pretty good team, and we're pretty ahead of the ball technology wise. I have connections with a lot of different analytics managers. Most of them at least don't use Python. Their teams don't. I can't speak for everyone. Of course, I know people who use Python, and I think it's a skill that everyone should learn. And I know some Python too, even though I never use it professionally. I just don't think it's where beginners should spend most of their time. So I think, take on that core stack I mentioned, and when you feel pretty comfortable with those, pretty proficient, maybe even after you've gotten into your first role, then start approaching Python. Find ways to implement it. I think it's a good way to stand out, maybe, or to broaden the scope of jobs you can maybe get into. But I've seen a lot of people overwhelm themselves with taking on Python first, because it's challenging. I'd say it's some might disagree with me. I think it's a little bit more challenging to wrap your head around than SQL. At least that's me. So that's kind of my hot take on that. I don't think it's where beginners need to spend too much of their time. So that's kind of my bottom line with Python.
Yeah, I think it's a great take. Yeah, I think it's a great take, and that's been my experience. I've had a 17-year career, and I've basically not had to use Python much. I've worked with it a little bit when somebody else is maybe writing some kind of automation, and I'm trying to give them the pseudo logic or something like that. But as a core in my stack, it personally hasn't come up a ton. I think it does come up if you want to be a data scientist, data engineer, it comes up a little bit more, and that can be where it's at the intersection, similar to how SQL is the intersection between the three. So I think that's another reason it gets a lot of hype. But I completely agree with your take. You're a beginner. Yeah. It's an intimidating way to start. So I agree. It should not be day one for anybody. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And to your point, I think when you are targeting maybe some of those more technically focused or technically advanced roles, I have a buddy who is a data engineer for Blizzard, and Python is almost all that he uses, but his role is very different from mine, and very different from a lot of the people that I talk to on a day-to-day. He's a strict programmer. Most people I talk to that's not what they're going for,
Yep.
So it does depend on what you want, but he's also further in his career. He's been doing it a lot longer than most people, a decade now. So, it's it just sort of depends on your situation.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Totally makes sense. So, everybody, I'm going to push Matt a little bit more into BI tools. He talked a little bit about BI tools, but before we do that, I actually am going to put another poll on the screen. I'd love to hear from you guys. which BI tool do you prefer, Tableau or Power BI or something else? We're going to get real controversial here. And then Matt's going to be in the hot seat right away. But I actually, I love his take, and it was surprising to me. So, but first, I'd love to hear what you guys say here. So, and I'm picking something else. I'm going with Metabase. That's my personal favorite as a heavy SQL user. So yeah, we're pretty heavy Power BI in the room. It looks like over 70% in Power BI, which is great. So yeah, the reason I wanted to ask this one specifically to you, Matt, is I had actually seen you on one of your YouTube videos with a really, what I thought was a really good take, and I was surprised because you are a Power BI developer. You know, you've got you like, this is your bread and butter. And I heard you say for beginners, go with Tableau, which was, to me, really interesting take. And then I heard your reasoning, and I loved it. And so I wanted, I feel like that was a question I had to ask you. Like, I mean, I kind of already gave away your answer, but yeah, where do you think beginners should focus on if they had to pick one tool?
Yeah, and I can share a bit more in context. Like you mentioned, I talk about it in my How to Become a Data Analyst in 2024 video on YouTube. I am a Power BI guy, and I've drank the Microsoft Kool-Aid in a lot of ways. But when it comes to, so here's the thing. I like to make things extremely black and white for people who are looking for a roadmap. And part of that for me is I like to eliminate choice. The reason for that is I know for me, I want people to tell me exactly what I need to do. Don't give me options. Don't give me choices. I shouldn't have to, just tell me what I need to do. And so a lot of times you hear like, oh, we'll pick Tableau or Power BI. It's up to you. And that's great. But if you don't know anything about either of the tools, you're going to say, I don't know which one to pick. And I choose Tableau or I recommend Tableau for pure beginners most of the time, not because it's like an easier tool or, you know, it's more basic. They're both, and I say this in the video, they're both very on par. They're both very powerful tools. They're a little different, you know. But one thing there's two things primarily about Tableau that I think make it very approachable for beginners. One is you can easily download it onto a PC or a Mac. If you're going for Power BI, you're gonna have to download Parallels if you're a Mac user, and that's gonna cost you about $100 a year. So it's a solution, but it's not an awesome solution. It's pretty much one of the only solutions though. But Tableau, you can still run it on a Mac. So it's a little bit easier to get up and running. The second, and this is probably the bigger one for me, is the Tableau public platform. I mean, and I say this a lot, but Power BI is as much as I love it, they're doing themselves a disservice by really trying to keep everything in their ecosystem by not having a public platform. For me, when I was breaking into the field, it was super easy to just share my Tableau public page with recruiters and employers and allow them to see all my projects in one spot. Like, obviously you should have a portfolio. I talk about that a lot, but sometimes employers will ask, oh, can I see your Tableau public link? And then you can have, you know, 5, 10, 15, however many projects on there, easy to view, easy to share. They can interact with it right there. If you're going the Power BI route and you're trying to show it to people, get a job, you're going to have to rely just on either like sharing a PBIX file or taking screenshots or maybe videos, which videos are a great way to go, like a video walkthrough. But it's like another hoop to jump through, as opposed to I could just upload it to Tableau Public and share the link to the project or the page. So it's not that I think either one is better than the other. I just think Tableau is way more approachable to get up and running with, easier to share, which is very good for people trying to break into the field. But in time, I think everyone should have at least an understanding of both. I actually started my career using Tableau, and then I eventually made the shift. I took on a job using Power BI the reason I got that job is I had really educated myself on Power BI. There's a lot of overlap, but I had projects and experience using the tool. So you should know both, but if you're just jumping in, I say Tableau. So that again is probably my hot-ish take.
Yeah. I mean, it looks like you probably got about 20% of people to run Screaming. Actually, no, sorry, 70% of people to run Screaming. But no, I love the take. I think it's a really good argument. One other take in the chat that I saw from Richard that I think is a good one is whichever one your employer uses. So yeah, if that's an option, to me is super easy tiebreaker. But like if you're not employed yet, you're trying to break in. I don't think you could go wrong, but I think Matt's got a pretty compelling argument there. So really awesome. And the other thing I'll say too is like I think sometimes folks they can think like, hey, I'm a Power BI person or I'm a Tableau person, and then they maybe exclude themselves from job opportunities. But like if you say you've gone really deep in one of them and you sort of have dabbled in the other, like if it was a Tableau role and you had a great Power BI portfolio or vice versa, and then you said, hey, this is what I've done. You can show off the core data viz skills. You can show off how you'd analyze a business, how you'd present your work, and you can at least come and say, I've dabbled in this already, and I can kind of compare and contrast the differences, and I'll be able to get up to speed pretty quick. Like to me, that's a very hireable person, and like the core skill of like analyzing the data, telling a good story, communicating. It's implemented a little differently, but really in a similar way. So my advice to folks would be don't try to pigeonhole yourself. Go deep on one, but like they should all be on the table for you, and the retraining is pretty light in my opinion. So
I think people tend to just naturally want to jump into camps, right? It's like Android versus iPhone. But when it comes to something like this, which can apply to your job, it is good to have an understanding of both. But I mean, you're absolutely entitled to have a favorite. I mean, my favorite is Power BI, but I don't discourage Tableau or Tableau users because it's a great tool with a lot of value. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's awesome. One more on technical skills before we get into anything else. So we've got a lot of people in here that are aspiring analysts. To the person who's maybe day one and they're just about to start their learning journey, which we talked about a bunch of tools. What tool do you start with on day one and why? And is there a close second in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and a bit of a tough one to answer, and something I'm continually thinking about. So I want to say Excel, but it is an incredibly close second to SQL. And let me explain my reasoning. So with Excel, I just think it's like a meme at this point, but all roads lead back to Excel. You are at some point in your career, no matter what job you're doing, are probably going to need to use Excel at some point. And it's really good to at least have an understanding of, pivot tables, lookups, basic aggregations. Like even if you're only using Excel for like data validation, which is all that I ever use it for these days, knowing stuff like pivot tables and all that is still super helpful for that. So it may not take you a long time to get up and running with Excel. I don't think you need to be an Excel master if you're picking it up first, but it's just so classic and foundational that it's a good one to approach first, I think. But then immediately after, a very close second is SQL. And that's because I think you're going to get a ton of mileage out of SQL. Very essential data skill, awesome tool. I mean, there's so many different tools where you'll use that querying ability. Not every analyst is going to be like performing big giant queries on stuff. If you're a developer and you're querying out of Snowflake, most of the time you're probably going to be doing pretty simple queries and stuff. But knowing the syntax and being comfortable with it, knowing SQL, yeah, it really important to know. So to kind of recap there, I think Excel, but super close second would be SQL.
Yeah, I love that that stance. I think that's exactly what I would recommend too. And the other thing I'd just throw in is that like I feel like Excel is probably the least intimidating for somebody who's at day one, because you can actually just like type into the rows, add things to the cells. You can, you can work with formulas to kind of get logical functions there, and like the pivot table, like you say, like I said, I started my career as an analyst in 2007. So like I'm getting old, and I still use Excel all the time. And for certain tasks, like a pivot table is still the best way to tackle them because it's so quick, it's so effective. So you don't always have to be fancy to win in this game. And the other thing is just like everybody's going to expect that you can do those things, right? So it gives you kind of that like that broad base. And then yeah, I agree. SQL opens up a lot of doors. It's like Excel, it's at every company, and there's a lot fewer people that are really good at SQL. So I think it also helps put you on the right side of supply and demand too. So I feel like Matt's roadmap here of Excel day one and then SQL to expand it. I think that's a fantastic one. Let's hear from the audience one more time. I'm getting poll happy here, but I feel like it's been really helpful in kind of steering the conversation. So I want to hear from you guys. What do you think is more important for an analyst? Technical skills like SQL and Excel, Power BI, other, or softer skills like communication, problem solving? Let's see what the votes say here. So we've got a lot of people saying both are equally important. Depends on the role. Yeah, very few people picking a side on this one. So interesting. I put both are equally important. And I don't know. Did you vote, Matt?
I've been skipping the polls just to keep, I don't know, my opinion out of it.
Keep the data clean.
I'm really curious to see, other people's responses.
Awesome. Yeah. So it seems like from the room, folks are largely saying it's equally important or it depends on the role. Almost 90% of all responses are in those two camps. What do you think about that question, Matt?
Yeah, that's a tough one too. But what I think, so soft skills, I want to start by saying are typically very what's the word? Like underestimated almost. Like you don't hear it talked about a lot, or it's not something that maybe comes up a lot directly in the interview process. Like it's a lot easier to evaluate someone's technical abilities. It's a little bit more black and white. Though I think with soft skills, a big opportunity to show those off is during the interview itself. You show some of those characteristics, and then maybe in your projects. I would probably argue that soft skills are more important. And that goes along with a couple things. One is my personal experience, but another is just a principle that I approach life with. So like one of my favorite books ever is How to Win Friends and Influence People. Great book. It's not as surface level as it sounds. It really is a book about human nature and psychology at its core. And being really good with people and good to people can overcome a lot of deficits. And so I think sometimes if you're the right person, or, you have those soft skills and you're a good person to work with, that can maybe overshadow some technical skill deficits in some cases. Again, it depends on the role, what they're looking for exactly, what kind of needs they have. But even for me, so when I was targeting my first analyst job, I interviewed. The interview, for the company I ended up getting hired with, after I was hired, they ended up saying, we interviewed people who were more technically advanced than you, but we really liked you as a person, and you had a lot of the domain knowledge that we were looking for. And domain knowledge is a soft skill, knowing the industry. And their perspective was just, it takes a lot longer to get someone up to speed on those things, or you can't really teach some of those things directly. And so in that case, soft skills did end up being more important. And it was a pretty good entry level job. It technically wasn't entry level, but it was my first data job. So that's kind of where I land the plane with that. Technical skills are obviously super, super duper important, but soft skills are very easy to overlook, but really can do a lot for you and make you a great analyst. And I think, just to quickly wrap up, I think that's because being an analyst is such a collaborative role in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it really is. That. Yeah, I think that's really well said. So you named domain knowledge, and I think that's a huge one, and that's probably not talked about enough. But whether we say like domain knowledge or business acumen, like however you want to talk, and I think it's a little different. Like at Maven, we're in the e-learning space, and just so like having some understanding of the e-learning space, if you were to be an analyst in this business, is really important. Or like if you work for General Motors selling cars, like just understanding how that industry works, what are the levers that they pull, key metrics, stuff like that. It really gives you a leg up, So I love that you talked about domain knowledge, because that's probably an overlooked soft skill. What are some of the other soft skills that come to mind when you think of that terminology, soft skill?
Yeah. Communication is a great one. I think about my day to day, and I'm talking with a lot of people, or I'm having to schedule meetings. I'm having to interact with stakeholders, and even, I don't want to say conflict management, or, I'm not sure what the best way to describe it is. Not that you're going to be having like conflict, but in my experience, sometimes you get pushback on the things that you're trying to support. Like for me, I work for the city, for the IT department, and we build a lot of solutions for different departments around the city, police department, fire department, whatever. And sometimes you're kind of trying to convince them why they should adopt a certain technology, or when you're maybe presenting a report, there may be some little things that they're unsure about or whatever. And not that we're always approaching like we're the best at what we do or the smartest, but sometimes you kind of have to work through requirements, and you have to be really delicate with that. And I think if you're someone who has a hard time talking with people, working with people, I'm sorry, my dog is barking. I'm sorry for anyone that can hear that. She'll bark at the slightest noise outside. But yeah, if you're not really good at interacting with people, or you're not very patient, you're gonna have a hard time. Like I worked with someone in the past. I'm not gonna say much about them, whatever. But I worked with someone in the past who they would have stakeholders they were working with who said they did not want to work with this person because they're hard to work with. And they basically got pulled off of that project for that. So you know what I mean? Like it's important. And those are the areas where it comes into play. It's easy to kind of view an analyst as just being like deep work coding all day. And some days you might be, I love deep work, but the true nature of the role oftentimes is you're doing a lot of collaboration, talking with people, communication, problem solving, and sometimes problem solving live, all those things.
Yeah. So well said. I mean, I think you gave the example of the person that nobody wants to work with. Then there's the opposite end of the spectrum, the person that's just like got that energy, and they're so helpful, and everybody wants them on those projects. Like if you're that person, you get every opportunity, you have to turn down some opportunities, right? So I think like that you could see the two ends of the spectrums having like really different career trajectories potentially. Plus that person that everybody likes and trusts and wants to work with, I think even if the technical skills are the same, I think they're more effective because people are more apt to listen to them, and they're better at understanding like what's really motivating the stakeholders and things like that. So it's a superpower. It's absolutely a multiplier for your thing. So I love that you're talking about communication. That's really high on my list for a really effective analyst. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Great. And so I want to encourage everybody we'll get to probably in about another 10 minutes. We'll put Matt in the hot seat, and we'll answer all your questions live. So use that questions tab. But I've got one more poll that I want to throw out here to kind of guide the next line of questions I'm going to throw at Matt, which is for you guys in the audience, where do you think you need to focus the most in terms of skill development? And we're gonna ask Matt to talk through kind of some of the best ways to build these muscles. So would love to hear what you guys are voting for. Awesome. So this one's pretty split. We're getting a lot for like how to build projects, which I know is big for you, Matt, which is great. Applying the skills to a business. I think that's one that, for everybody who talks about data, talked about a little bit less, less than the technical skills. So that'll be a really interesting one. Great. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we should probably let this poll kind of guide some of this. So let's talk a little bit about like somebody who wants to start actually getting their hands dirty and learn how to build their own projects, because that's the most popular one. What advice would you give to that person, Matt?
Yeah, I think a good approach often is to take some sort of course and get some. I guess it depends on where you're at, but get an understanding of whatever you're trying to learn, and then approach with a project immediately after. And sometimes you'll do courses where or ideally you're doing a guided project, but you want to work on projects on your own. I see sometimes people who handicap themselves a bit by only approaching guided projects. The reason I say you're handicapping yourself is you're not really getting the experience of working through problems on your own. Because if you're just taking a data set that you find online and then you're turning it into a project, you're going to encounter some sort of issues. If you're coming up with questions you want to answer about the data. And I always think, approach it like like you have a stake in the business with that data set. Like if it's an Airbnb data set and you're like an investor, what do you want to know about that city that's going to help you have the best Airbnb? So what questions do you have? And then you answer that through your analysis, and then you present it. So creating lots of projects really, or maybe you're just kind of tackling a YouTube video that breaks down a singular topic. Well, then go back and then try to implement them, and even if your portfolio only shows maybe 5 projects, it's good to have, way more in your backlog that you've just kind of like worked out personally. And they don't always need to be pristine, but when you get that knowledge of working through problems, it helps a lot.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And one of the biggest learning moments in any kind of craft you're trying to go through is like that moment that you're describing of like, oh crap, I don't know how to do this part, like, hey, I remember they taught me most of this, but there's this like one thing I'm stuck on and the whole project hinges on it, and you have to go figure it out on your own. And just that experience of kind of purpose driven, like it's for this thing that I really want to do, and I just got to figure it out. Like building that muscle of like, hey, I'm going to hit a wall and then I'm going to figure it out. That's a big part of being an analyst too, right? Because the real job is different than the courses where everything's neat and they give you a step-by-step walkthrough. So I love that advice of just trying to get your hands on some projects that you're doing on your own, really with less guidance. The sooner the better is I think really, really great advice.
And you'll find out if you like that. Like I love that.
Yeah.
Even at work, when I run into something that I am stumped on, the process of figuring that out, even if it takes hours, it's one of the things I like most about the job. And then it's so satisfying when you do. But if you're going through your own personal projects and you're running into that and it's making you miserable, I mean, then maybe it's not right for you. Like you kind of like, you'll get some of that real world experience by doing that. So,
yep. Yeah. It's the closest to practicing in a real world scenario as you can get, like it, I mean, it really is like there's not that much difference in like an employer telling you, hey, I want you to solve this problem versus you saying, I want to solve this open-ended problem myself. Like it's the exact same exercise. So
Right.
that's awesome. So the next kind of skill development area people said was applying data skills to a business. And this is, I'd say of this list, this is probably the least talked about in terms of people who talk to the data community. So super interesting to hear this. How do you think somebody would start to build those muscles, like applying the data skills to a specific business?
So are we talking like a specific industry? I want to make sure I understand the question. Applying data skills to a business.
I think so. Like, so like, how to use SQL and Excel. How do you apply those skills to add value to, a specific industry, pick, say, retail industry or something like that. Like, how do you bridge that from like technical to actually adding value in the business?
Yeah. And in that example, like, are you already in the data job, or for someone who wants to get into that?
Yeah, good question.
I'm making it probably more complicated.
No, it's awesome. I think because we had so many people who were aspiring analysts, let's start there. Like you're not in the job yet, because I think this is it does come up a lot. People say, how do I get that business experience? How do I learn to apply the skills? Like, yeah, that person who's aspiring analyst, what would be the advice to them?
Yeah, I think like if you're not already working in a field that is the same industry you want to get into as an analyst, then it's good to like take on projects using that data. So like let's go back to my example from earlier. Like for me, the domain knowledge I had was credit and collections. Like I was a billing and collections supervisor before I went into data. And what I ended up becoming was a billing analyst, essentially. And so I already had that domain knowledge. So, if you're working in healthcare and you want to become an analyst, like my good friend Joe Squire, he was a registered nurse and then went into being a healthcare analyst. You have that domain knowledge. If that's not you, say you're in a job that either you just don't want to stay in that industry, or it's just an industry that doesn't really translate, then niche down and approach data sets and projects that use that data. So if you want to be a marketing analyst, and it can be kind of hard to decide what you want to be as an analyst, like the industry, but do your best to maybe approach more of those data sets to learn about the industry and have some industry specific projects as well. That's probably what I would say. Like kind of you're doing your best to understand the industry to the best of your ability without having real experience in it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I shouldn't say real, like professional experience. Because when you're working with the data, that's real, So
yep. Yeah, I think that's such good advice. Is like, don't feel held back that you haven't been in the job. And for you make me think of there's one of our students recently. She was a marketer, and she just got her first analyst job, and she was trying to figure out how do I make that transition. And one of her breakthrough moments was she shouldn't be focused on data analyst. She should be focused on marketing analyst, because that was where her superpower was, because she knew all the domain knowledge of being a marketer. Like she understood channels, she understood customer acquisition. And so she was bringing all of that. And that's where she wiped the floor with other people that were interviewing. Like she just was so much stronger there, and she actually transitioned pretty fast. And I mean, she put in a ton of work too, but I think her being really smart about like leaning into that advantage that she had with domain knowledge was like a brilliant move on her part. So if you do have those advantages, it can be great.
Yeah. And to your point, not every data analyst job is titled data analyst.
Yeah.
There's a lot of niche analysts. Like the title is very niche because the industry is niche, but you're still a data analyst, Yep. So it helps to approach it from that direction too. If you're just typing data analyst into the search bar, you might be a little bit limited in what you find.
Yeah, that's awesome. So next we're gonna put you in the hot seat like we promised. We're gonna get into some of the questions here from the audience, but first, Matt, if folks want to hear more from you, if they liked your style of talking about this stuff, where can they find more information?
Yeah, well, I'm on LinkedIn and YouTube. Definitely would recommend people check out my YouTube channel. It is, I've only been at it for like 7-8 months now. It's getting better every week. But I talk about a lot of these concepts in my videos. And I've been putting a lot of energy and attention into that channel as well. So yeah, definitely go check that out. And then for daily ramblings from me, people can find me on LinkedIn. I post just about every day.
That's awesome. Yeah. And for folks in the audience, I've known Matt for quite a while, probably a year or more now, through LinkedIn. I feel like that's where I've got to know you. And I recently found the YouTube channel, and I was like, man, this is really good stuff. Like, this is great advice. It's well delivered. And that's what made me reach out to Matt and say, like, I got to get him to come on this show, because it's really, really valuable content for folks. So like, that's free. The link's right here on the screen. Grab that, go subscribe to the channel and check it out. If you're interested in this general topic that we're talking about today, or related topics, you'll probably find some really great stuff from Matt there. So check that out.
Appreciate that, John.
Yeah. And then I got one more link I'm going to put on the screen. So for anybody who has attended today, we've got a special offer from Maven. And so basically what this is an entire year of unlimited access, which is normally $349 USD. For folks who've attended here, you can get that for $199. The other thing that's pretty cool about that is we have a twice a year sale that we do right now. We're running this spring savings event that, one, it's a little bit more expensive than this deal here. So this is a better deal in terms of the cost. And most of the time when we run our Black Friday or our spring savings deal, it's only for the first year, and then it goes back up to full price if you decided to stick around later. This is a lifetime price lock. So even if like we raised our prices in the future, you guys will get that. So grab that link, and if you're interested, you can get that. So
yeah, and I want to say too, just to plug that, I love Maven Analytics. Like, one of the reasons we're talking today is we know each other through LinkedIn, right? And I recommend Maven Analytics to people all the time. Like, it's an awesome platform. So everyone definitely go check it out if you haven't already.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate it. We're a small team, and we're doing our best to kind of put what we think is the best content out there to help train people who want to be amazing at data. We got work to do still, but we're pretty proud of what we put together. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get into some of these questions. So I'm gonna look at what we've got here in terms of the top upvoted questions, and I'll put these on the screen, and Matt, I'll ask you about them. So first from Ayumide, we've got: how do you properly show experience in your resume if your only experience is projects that you've worked on and you haven't even had a job? How would you think about that one, Matt?
Okay, let me read through this. Let's see. Okay. Okay. So I assume this is maybe for someone who is a recent graduate, or maybe someone coming from a long-term career break, maybe for someone who's been working with their family, or building up their family as a homemaker. I think the thing is there, like, projects really is, I think, what you have to lean into. If your only experience is projects you've worked on, you've had no job at all, but you really want to treat those projects on your resume almost as if they were work experience. Like, to talk about the resume itself, like, I recommend having a project section that is like at least 30% of your resume. And if you had no job at all, maybe 50% plus. And it should be like near the top. Like, if you don't have real-time working experience as an analyst, I'd probably throw the project section right at the top underneath like a quick little skills section, and approach it like or talk about it like you would work experience, with like bullet points and this is what I analyzed and the skills that I used and the findings. Like try to flex some of those analyst skills in your bullet points, just like you would flex maybe accomplishments in an actual job, and linking the project. So leaning on those and doing some quality projects too. I want to get like real for a second with people. I think sometimes people think that just because they have projects that they're entitled to a job or owed a job, but the quality of your projects matters. Sometimes I'll hear people say, I have all these projects, why aren't I getting a job? I'll be honest with you, I look at them and they're not that good. Mm-hmm. And I try to give constructive feedback, but it has to be a good project. It has to stand out. It has to be as challenging as you can make it, for your resume projects, which probably good to have about 3 on there. Because just because you have projects doesn't mean people are going to toss you a job. You have to really treat them seriously and leverage them to show your ability in communication, storytelling, the technical ability, the way you walk through it. And that's why I recommend having a portfolio with like a project write-up. Is the best thing I know to call it, but just where you're kind of like walking through the process of creating the project, because people will look at that. Not every single recruiter who comes across your resume is going to go deep in your portfolio, but some will. And then usually if you have an interview lined up, a lot of the times in my experience, the hiring manager will go through it beforehand. So that's my answer there. I hope that helps. I hope that answers the question adequately.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, and I love that you caveat it with like they have to be quality projects too, because just like having a project that isn't great it's not going to help you, right? I love that you said link to the projects on the resume. Like I think that is so smart. Don't just talk about them. Actually, it's always better to show than to tell. So I think that's really, really good advice. And then the one other angle that I'll throw on there is if you have a project that's really specific to the actual job, like in the case of the person I talked about before who wanted a marketing analyst job, a marketing analysis is better than a supply chain analysis, because the person on the other side, what they're really trying to get is answer the question, can she do the work that I need her to do? And some generic data analysis on another domain helps a little bit, but like the exact thing that I need her to do, that's gold. That's the best thing that I could possibly look for. So that's right. A piece I'd add to that too. Awesome. Yeah. Really, really good advice there, guys. Hope you guys taking notes, what Matt has here. So let's do another one here. This is a really interesting one from Humema. Is freelancing a good option for a data analyst? It's a great question.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess I'll approach this question in 2 ways. So if you're not yet a data analyst and you want to do some freelancing to get experience, I think that's one of the best things you could do. It's going to be challenging. It's like a bit of a catch-22 because especially environments like Upwork or Fiverr, they're super competitive. Oftentimes it's a race to the bottom. But if you can get work on there and get some real experience, that's great. Even better if, there's like someone who has a company, maybe a small business, and you're doing some work for them pro bono. That's great too. Now, the other way I want to approach the question is maybe someone who wants to become a data analyst, but they don't want to go the route of being a full-time employee, because I think perfectly respectable way to approach an entire career as an analyst is by being a freelancer. I think about graphic designers or video editors or all that. Like you can work for a big company doing those things, but there's a lot of freelancers doing it too. I think we're going to see that become more popular with data analysis. That's great. Obviously, it's going to take longer to get up and running because in kind of the freelance world, your portfolio is arguably even more important. So it's a slow burn, but I don't think there's any kind of shame in approaching that route head on, But for the person looking just to get some experience, yeah, if you can pull it off, 1000% recommend it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really great answer. I totally agree. Let me throw another one up here. So this is from Bahara. And so if you're working as a data analyst, have you ever felt that after analyzing your data, you can't find any glorious insight to give to your stakeholders? Like, what would you do in that situation? Wow, such an interesting one.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it depends. And I say it depends because, okay, in my first data analyst job, I did have a boss who was very much like, here's the data, give me some insights.
Yep.
And I would just kind of have to like piece it together. And it was challenging sometimes. And you just do your best. Like you work with the data you have. And when you're presenting it, you can give some context and as to the best you're able to do, so just give what you got, spend a lot of time with the data. I mean, if it's the thing at the top of my plate for a day, like I'll just stare at it and just keep thinking, and I'll just mess around with the visuals or whatever and just start piecing things together and come up with the best insights I can. But I will say that more often than not, you will be given the insights that you need to provide. So it could be, these are the metrics that we want to analyze or visualize, whichever, and you're kind of going to be spoon-fed that, and then it's up to you to develop it, query the data or visualize it, whatever. So a lot of the times it's going to be handed to you, and then you might find some other helpful things along the way. Like maybe they'll give you kind of, this is at a minimum what we want, but do what you can. So you at least have the core things that you're working off of. And then along the way, you might just find something interesting, or if you have time and space to fill, and you think, oh, this would be a really good one to throw in there. Like if you're developing a dashboard. So that's what I think. That's what I think for that. Yeah. Curious to hear what you think too, John.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And I think of, I still get my hands dirty with data like every single day. It's a big part of my role. And sometimes I'll find out something like that's, hey, really insightful. And then there's other things that I will never get an answer to, and I'll be stumped. And so, for example, to make it kind of concrete, like at Maven, it's a learning platform, and okay, a whole bunch of people just subscribed, like more than usual the past couple of days. Obviously, one of the things, like I run marketing at our company, and one of the things I'm always trying to figure out is why did that happen? Like, was it some great campaign that the marketing team did? Was it, did Chris go viral on social or something like that? And sometimes I can figure it out, and sometimes I'm just scratching my head. Like I've asked so many questions and I have no idea. And at the end of the day, I have to just say, like, I can't figure this out. Like I'm looking at the source data, I'm looking at things that the customers told us, and like it all kind of looks normal. There's just more customers, and I have no idea. We're not running a sale or anything like that. So that happens all the time, and I think one of the things like I'll do is, I look at all the things that I look at, and other people at Maven are trying to figure this out too with me, and I'll say, hey, these are the things I looked at. These are the things that don't look unusual. So kind of like we've answered these questions, and it's just a head scratcher. So that's something you can do is, even if you don't have any like major insights, you can at least share kind of what you've explored to show folks like, hey, this is what I've ruled out, things like that. But that it happens all the time. Sometimes there's just there might not be really anything in the data, no matter how good you are at the job. So
and it's very case dependent, like you said. Sometimes you're kind of just digging into something. But if it's like a specific request you're fulfilling, doing what you can on the front end to get as much information as possible is helpful. Yeah. Sometimes you can only go so far with that.
Yeah. This is another good one, and we won't go too many more, but this one's from Chelsea. And so what titles outside of data analyst might be good in good to search for in the job hunt. You touched on this already, Matt, that like not every data analyst job is called data analyst. So like, what are some other titles people could be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many is the thing. When you really get down to it, there's an analyst for just about every industry. You can look at, business analyst, financial analyst, marketing analyst, sales analyst, so on and so forth. Business intelligence analyst is a big one, but I think maybe the biggest ones is maybe a good place to start. The biggest ones other than data analyst, I think are going to be like BI analyst, business analyst, and even financial analyst. And maybe I'm missing one or two big ones, but there's a lot though. Yeah. And that's where it's helpful to even just maybe if you're typing into a search bar, for instance, typing in just analyst. But you have to be careful because not every analyst job is an analyst job. There are companies who will just call maybe non-technical associates. They'll call them analysts. So I want to give an example. When I was a billing analyst, I was a true data analyst. But a lot of the people who were like, for example, like sending emails and making calls to collect, they were called analysts, and incredibly misleading, in my opinion, because they're not analyzing anything. They're just like, they have a quota of calls they have to make, and they just run through the calls, So you do have to be careful when you're approaching analysts, and that's where I think just attention to detail in the resume, the job description to make sure it's a true analyst role. And then you'll get a feel for that during the interview too. Yep. But the analyst title is very broad, and that's helpful in some ways because you can kind of find more niche categories, but it can also be a little challenging in how misleading it is at times. So.
Yep, absolutely. You might wind up as like a sports commentator with an analyst role if you're not careful.
Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah.
Awesome.
Which wouldn't be so bad, but
yeah, that's perfect. So one thing I'm going to just drop the link to Matt's YouTube channel and that Maven deal in the chat right here. I want to do a couple things to just kind of tell you guys about what events are coming up because we do have some great events coming up. But I'd love to hear from everybody in the chat. Tell us, how do you think Matt did today? I got an opinion. I want to hear from you guys. So hopefully it's good. If this isn't good, I probably won't ask that question again. But
they're gonna test it out on me.
Awesome. So let me share some things that we've got coming up. But yeah, so good news, Matt. You're not getting skewered here. Everybody's seeming really happy and really appreciative. I agree. I think so much value that you've given folks who were generous enough to spend an hour with us today. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing this. You're everything I hoped that you'd be for the audience.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone.
And so next week we've got on Wednesday we've got Alex the analyst. He's going to be talking about the future of AI and data. So if you're somebody who's trying to figure out, is AI coming for my job or my future job that I'm trying to get, this is going to be a really, really good one to see. He's going to be talking about things like what are kind of the most promising AI tools? How should you be thinking about that question? Like, is AI scary or is AI going to help multiply my skills? So that'll be awesome. And then the week after that, we've got Annie and Ian. I saw Ian in the chat today. Ian, how are you? And I know Matt knows both of these folks well.
Both very good friends of mine. Annie and
yeah,
Ian
when I asked them who they might want to co-host with, they both included Matt on the list. So Matt plays well with others. He's that analyst that everybody does want to work with, not the other end of the spectrum that we talked about. So Annie and Ian, they're going to be talking about for folks who are trying to get that first job. So, the big chunk of you guys that all said aspiring analyst, that's going to be a really, really good topic for you. And that'll be 2 weeks from yesterday. So hope that we'll see a lot of you there. Thanks everybody for spending an hour with us. This was a lot of fun, and Matt, you absolutely rocked it. So most importantly, thank you so much for giving all this value to our audience.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on. It was an awesome experience. Glad I could be here.
Great. All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.